Come on in. Just stoke the fire. Take a seat and get the cold out. You're familiar with that line, right? Any old innkeeper in Skyrim can use it to greet you. But there is one inn where you'll never hear it, and that's the Roughwater Inn. But where is that inn? What does it look like? Who owns it? Those are all very good questions, and I shall come to find out the answers are all kinda muddled. So first things first, where do we get the name Roughwater Inn from? Well, that's the easy part. During the Civil War, one of the missions you can receive may be a false front. In this mission, you are tasked with killing a courier and delivering falsified information to a local commander. If you receive this mission from the Imperials, then you'll be briefed as such.
The Nightgate and Candlehearth Inns are frequent stops for Stormcloak runners.
But here's the interesting bit. The record holding this dialogue bears the name CW Mission 03 Details Imperial New. And when a Bethesda game uses a suffix in this manner, that's usually a sign that there's an old equivalent floating around somewhere as well. And while those usually get deleted, that's not the case here. The older iteration is still listed in the same record actually. It goes like this.
We understand the Nightgate and Roughwater Inns are frequent stops for Stormcloak runners.
And that's literally the only mention of the inn to be found anywhere. It's not mentioned in any other dialogue, notes, files, concept art, earlier dialogue in the dialogue views files. As far as I know, it's not even brought up in any design docs. This is the only surviving mention. And that's both really weird as well as really intriguing. There isn't a single other inn with this distinction to be found anywhere in the game, used or unused. You know, all the big hold capitals have inns, and the smaller ones do too, as well as some smaller settlements having inns, and there are even some standalone inns out there. But weirdly enough, none of them line up with the possibility of being the Roughwater Inn. Could it have been an earlier name? I suppose so, but of the inns I mentioned here, there are only two with known earlier names. Markart's Silverblood Inn was originally called the Silverfish Inn, but that's due to the respective family getting a name change more so than anything. And then there's also the Old Roldan Inn, which was originally known as the Hanged Man's Inn. Speaking of, I find it quite particular to have an inn missing in the first place, because the two instances of standalone inns in the final game are the result of their surrounding towns getting cut. The Nightgate Inn was originally part of the village ofElyarken, while the Hanged Man's Inn was part of the village of Old Roldan. In the latter case, I feel like the inn took on the former village's name so that Bethesda could reuse the dialogue referring to it as just Old Roldan, as it was vague enough. So let's assume that the Roughwater Inn wasn't an early name. Then it might have been a completely cut inn? Well, like I said, it's very rare to see a village's inn get cut and nothing else. There is only one cut inn found in the files, and it's only kinda cut. I'm of course referring to the Lost Man's Reprieve from Helgen. Like, it's kinda implied to go through there in the intro, but the location, alongside some other places in Helgen, does have an interior cell, even if they're completely unfinished. I would assume these are all either for testing purposes or behind the scenes stuff, like Helgen Homestead, but that honestly doesn't seem to be the case. It more so feels like the developers at one point wanted you to be able to enter the buildings in Helgen, but that idea was seemingly abandoned quite early on, as they settled on having everything be destroyed instead. So maybe the Roughwater Inn was one of those special inns that are found outside normal habitations, like Liar's Retreat or the Stumbling Sabercat. Well, it might have been, but I feel like that's a bit too much out there. I personally think the answer is easier than that. You might remember me talking about this in the past, but there is actually a place where we know an inn was once meant to be. Let's go back to that dialogue for a sec, right? One of the most important things we can learn from it is the fact that wherever the Roughwater Inn was supposed to be, it was under Stormcloak control. So that narrows it down quite a bit. And wouldn't you know it, the place I'm thinking of not only is under Stormcloak control, but the name Roughwater Inn would also make a lot of sense there. This, of course, being Darkwater Crossing, the fishing/mining/farming settlement that Bethesda bungled up in all kinds of ways. Yeah, Darkwater Crossing has the unique distinction of being the only settlement in Skyrim where we know an inn once stood that didn't make it in the final game. This inn was meant to be operated by miner Sondas Drenham. Funnily enough, not only does Sondas wear barkeep clothes in the final game, but his class is also set to food vendor, as is the norm for innkeepers. But if you told me that's all circumstantial evidence, I'd agree with you. Our smoking gun here is the name used by his scenes with Tormir, which are named Dialogue Darkwater Crossing Inn Scene, followed by a number. These scenes are all collected under the header called Inn Scenes as well. I find it interesting how this just adds another little mystery to the pile for this specific settlement, as Darkwater Crossing has so many strange cuts. And while I don't feel like I have any definitive proof that the Roughwater Inn was meant to be located here, I feel like being able to say that this inn was definitively in Stormcloak territory is already a lot, but the fact that the name fits Darkwater Crossing's general theme, as well as the fact that it's the only place with an unknown inn, leads me to believe that this is a pretty accurate guess. What do you think? You might compare and contrast the dialogue versions and conclude that the Roughwater Inn was the early name for Windhelm's Candleheart Hall, but that doesn't really make much sense, seeing as the cities were developed before the towns. We have reason to believe that Candleheart Hall always existed in some form or another. The name doesn't really fit it at all, and the Stormcloak variant of the mission also has 2 inns from towns rather than cities. Oh yeah, I hadn't even really mentioned how the final game's choice of an inn doesn't really make a lick of sense. Like, okay, Legatricke, one of the courier's favorite inns to stop by is located inside of their capital. Are you sending me on a one-way trip? Whatever the case. I hope you see things my way. Or, let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this little mystery.